Welcome to our podcast. My name is Jackson Beerbauer.
My name is Jocelyn Carrillo.
My name is Annalise Aquino.
And my name is Tia Nguyen.
This is our podcast about mental illness and one of the many solutions like non-public schools that can help out people.
Children's mental health and struggles within the academic environment within elementary, middle, and high schools. Jamie Fatts is currently an elementary school psychologist that works directly with children who struggle with mental illness. She touches on a variety of different topics that demonstrate the everyday challenges that students face in an academic environment. Although these students grapple with emotional hardships, teachers face difficulties as well. She discussed a different type of school that specializes in working with children who have mental health needs and the process of getting into one of these schools.
What I do there is I kind of have a split job. I do evaluations on students to determine if they have disabilities. So I test them for special education services. But then I also provide mental health services to students who are in special education and who have mental health needs. So that's our students who are typically in special education for having an emotional disturbance, which usually means they have a mental illness of some type, or students who are other health impaired, which usually means that they have ADHD.
One of the things that I found very profound during my interview with Jamie Fatts is that something as small as ADHD could wind up having a student going into special ed classes when special ed has a large stigma, or at least did have a large stigma associated with it. And another thing about non-public special ed classes is that it's largely based on grades. So a student could be health impaired and have good grades and not be put into special ed classes. And some students could also really not be that health impaired, again, like students with ADHD, and could be put into special ed classes. So in some ways, the spectrum doesn't really matter.
To piggyback off of what Tian said, actually, when I was younger, I was recommended for a special ed type of class when I was younger because, I don't know, my grades were just not where they needed to be. And I remember walking out of class and stuff to go to a special required hours to do homework and stuff, like walking, like out, everybody in class would just know that, like, I was in those classes and just look at me. It just made you feel, not great, it just made you feel like you were less of a student than everybody else in class. And I feel like the stigma that like the classes had did trickle down to like my fellow classmates to look at me differently, you know?
That ever increased your mental illness, or did it make you ever feel worse? Did you feel like your mental illness got a little bit deeper or a little bit more severe? Because some students who are forced into these special needs classes do develop stronger issues.
Well, I think in my case, at least, like speaking for me, it was more of an emotional like issue with me because like I felt like I didn't, because it was just purely like how Teen said earlier, like sometimes it can be about grades. So like my grades weren't where they needed to be, and I was placed in those classes. So emotionally, like I was just angry, like I was mad, like I needed to go, and I didn't want to be there. So like, you know what I mean, like no child should feel anger going to school, you know?
Absolutely not.
This is a case of Jocelyn not being on the spectrum, but still being placed in those special ed classes.
The passing of responsibilities, like, you know, like, oh, her grades aren't where they need to be, it's probably because of A, B, and C, and D put her in there, instead of, like, taking the time to really, like, you know, how Jamie said she tests children, I wasn't. My grades just weren't where they need to be, and he put me in those classes, and that's it, you know? Case closed. And that's not how, like, it should work, you know?
It's not how it works, and that also can relate to our final topic that we'll be speaking about later, which is about how backgrounds do affect everyone's mental illness.
Mm-hmm. Non-public schools in California is a topic that is often overlooked or not included in discussions involving the rest of the educational system. There seems to be a lack of education and knowledge of non-public schools and what they truly are. There's a lack of knowledge because this issue is hard to discuss due to stigmas that are tied to mental health illness. These schools focus on working directly with students when there isn't any other option elsewhere.
Working in what we call a non-public school, which in the state of California, that's a school where it's a school that serves only special education students, and the school I worked at served students who were severely emotionally disturbed. So we had about 80 students there.
I noticed that you said you worked at a non-public school,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I remember correctly, and I might not, public schools are, by law, they have to serve everyone regardless of mental health
Right.
or disability, right?
Yeah.
Is this still considered under that law, or is this more like a private school?
So it's not a private school. The public school district pays these non-public schools to take their students.
So it's like a separated public school.
Yeah, I mean, so it's not a private school. Like,
Yeah.
the parents aren't paying for this. It's the school district
Yeah.
that pays to have it, because the school district, it reaches a point where the school district says, we have reached the end with this child. So when a student is in special education, they're on what's called an IEP, an individualized education program, and there's a continuum of services that student can receive. And it starts all the way where the student could be fully in general education with everybody else. They might get some accommodations, and they might need to be pulled out from class a little bit. They might need to be in a full special ed class all day on a public campus. But if they can't they're not accessing their education, which means they're not making any progress in their academics, it reaches a point where the public school district says, we're not meeting this child's needs. And so it's a team decision. The parents have to agree. And then the school district makes an agreement with the non-public school, and they essentially pay for that child to attend that school. It can go beyond that.
So a non-public school serves these students based on what the IEP team decides these students' needs. And one of the things that I found after this interview during my research is that non-public schools have been largely successful in serving these needs, because 3 years after their graduation from these non-public schools is that these previously students with mental health illnesses have lower rates of crime, lower rates of having a breakout, and they have higher rates of getting a job and maintaining that same job.
I also think another great thing about non-public schools is you don't have to disclose that you went to a non-public school. And I think that really helps some kids or adults in the future when they do need to get a job. They don't have to think back to the time that they were at a non-public school. They can just say they were at a regular school, and no one will really be able to say like, oh no, I saw you in a special needs class. They were somewhere else because their issues may have been a little bit more severe and they needed a little extra help. There's nothing wrong with needing.
Public schools pay for children to go into non-public schools. If you're in like lower income area and your school just does not have a lot of money, they'd rather just keep the child in regular public school and keep them in special education classes. But sometimes the issues that arise, no one's trained properly to know. So it's kind of like a never-ending cycle of them never getting the help that they really, truly need.
That's so interesting that you say that, Jocelyn. Annalise, I believe you did a little bit of research on how to get in a non-public school. Could you tell us a little bit about that right now?
The process of entering a non-public school isn't glamorous by any means. It's actually quite disheartening. The process stems from the behavioral challenges and the reality that there aren't any more options to help these students in public schools.
There's so many trainings out there for teachers to be trauma informed. We give trainings to our regular general education teachers to be trauma informed, because the reality is that any student that steps foot into your classroom can have a trauma background. And you have to be informed on how to work with them, because they're not going to present the same as a child who's been raised in, a typical household that hasn't experienced trauma. They're going to act differently, and you can't treat them the same. So I feel like I've seen that as a big improvement, because I think that's huge. there's so much trauma, there's so much that kids go through, that these are the people that are spending all day with these kids. They need to know how to work with them, because I get teachers all the time. They get these students in their classes that are acting up, they're bad. And I'll say, do you know what this child's been through? No. Well, let me tell you a little bit. And you start to tell them, and you're like, then they're like, oh, I guess there's no wonder they act like this. Oh, I guess not.
I think that's a life lesson that everyone can kind of take a note from. We don't know what every person has been through. We don't know the background of everyone that we meet. And I think that is so important, that we go to people and we meet people with an open mind and an open heart, because we don't know what's affected them. We don't know what is going on through their mind either. So I think all of us as people need to open our hearts to everyone else and let them come naturally, instead of placing a stigma or placing expectations on them. One thing I've learned as an adult is that having expectations on people that you are just meeting can only lead to disaster, only lead to disappointment. And I think that's a really important lesson that everyone needs to learn.
A struggle with the boundaries of what is school and what is the responsibility of a parent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really feels like people are trying to pass off the responsibility as much as they can, when in reality, when handling mental health and disability, it should be more of a trifecta, right?
Yeah.
School is only a portion of
Right.
what needs to be done. There's also parenting and healthcare that
Exactly.
also needs to be just as adequate.
Yes. So I feel, say for example, some of the school shootings that have occurred. I'm sure you've heard that they put I feel like there's a lot of blame that gets put on school districts for these kids. And they'll say the school didn't do anything with these mass shooters. And it's like, well, wait, because I could have been the psychologist that assessed that kid. And it's like, I know what that feels like. Like, if I would have been the one to assess that kid and say, like, okay, yeah, because the area that they would qualify in, if they were mentally ill, we call it emotionally disturbed. So if he would qualify, put him in special ed. In special ed, that means they're going with a special ed teacher. They're not getting like therapy. That means because it means that their academic performance isn't at par. That's what special education is. So keep this in mind when I'm talking about the school shooters, because that's kind of more of what they're saying. If they're saying the school missed it, they're typically saying, because anytime a kid starts having behaviors like that, this happened to me in the high school all the time, they would always come to me, you should test him. Well, then that means you think he needs to be in special education, which means that they have to have something that's impacting their education. So a school shooter could be a genius and getting straight A's, right? They might not cross my path. Somebody might say, let's say they wrote a creepy poem or something. It's come across my desk. It just happened to me sometime in this distance learning that a kid wrote something that a teacher thought was weird and sent it to the counselor, and the counselor sent it to me, and I was like, no, that's not weird. And, but like, let's say that a kid that happened, and that's what I would say. Like, if I thought it was weird, this is what I would say. Yeah, that's weird. Somebody should look at getting that kid some help.
I think that's so interesting, because you can see that at any academic level. Like my freshman year at Monterey Bay, I had a friend who literally got flagged for an essay about Ted Bundy's.
Although there is awareness for mental health, in many cases there is a lack of awareness of the struggles that children face in a learning environment. Unfortunately, students face struggles within school environments, and they face them at home as well. Schools typically have the opportunity to work with students, but many parents feel the desire to pass responsibility onto schools due to the extensive training school counselors have. Jamie explored a different realm of mental illness awareness by sharing her experience with non-public schools. With better awareness of non-public schools in California, we could decrease the stigma against students and help better their education and their future.
This is HCOM 340S. My name is Jackson.
Jocelyn.
And Elise.
Etienne.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in, and don't forget to wear a mask.